Chapter 2. "That's some keeker you've got there, McCann." Thelma Blakey shouted to him across the playground. Her spiky hair was as black as his eye had become over the weekend. She sauntered over to him, chewing her gum, trying to look cool. She fancied herself as his girlfriend. She wished. Thelma Blakey was as hard as nails, always in trouble at school, even when she was there, which wasn't very often. She seemed to think that she'd mapped her out as a suitable bird for a McCann. No way. Though even Cole could see she had the potential to be a stunner, in spite of the gothic white face and the black eyes. But as soon as Blakey opened her mouth, she spoiled everything. Blakey's voice could grate cheese. She was too loud, too harsh, too brash. Always it seemed to Cole that she was trying to impress him. Like now. She stopped in front of him and blew a bubble right in his face. He was tempted to flatten it all over her ghost white cheeks. It burst with a bang and she sucked it back into her mouth. She laughed. "Big fight at the weekend? Heard there was trouble up your way." Cole shrugged. "Nothing to do with us. Me and Mungo were in all night. This," he pointed to his eye, "this was an accident." "Some accident? Want me to kiss it better?" Cole curled his lip in disgust. "I'd rather be eaten by tarantulas." He walked away for a while. She stood watching him, still trying to look cool. His mate, Denny, ran up behind him. "You're well in there, Cole." As Cole turned to face him, Denny's eyes lit up. "Wow, what bus hit you?" He told Denny the same story that he told Blakey. Mates they might have been, bosom buddies they were not. The lie would be all he would ever tell anyone. The truth would be between him and his brother. Every teacher that morning asked him the same question and was given the same answer. Except for Mrs. Holden, the maths teacher. She and Cole had long ago decided that they didn't like each other. She had also taught Mungo, remembered him from his time at the school, remembered the trouble he had caused her, and every other teacher. She'd expected the same trouble from the younger McCann, and Cole hadn't disappointed her. When he paid no attention in class, he made sure no one else did either. She didn't ask what happened to him, not out loud, but her eyebrow lifted ever so slightly when he strolled in late to her class. "It's okay, Mrs. Holden," Cole explained. "I was having an intellectual discussion about algebra, and the other guy lost his temper. See these mathematicians? They can't take a joke." Denny laughed. Most of the class did too. Only Mrs. Holden's face remained stony. "It would be nice to know you could be passionate about something, Cole," was all she said. If only she knew the truth, Cole thought, as he slid down in his seat. Would she ever have done what he did for his brother? Somehow, he didn't think so. Part of him wanted to tell her, to shout it to the world. But no, it had to be a secret, a McCann's secret, and that's how it would stay. The cold, wet weather turned to ice, and the hilly town became treacherous. The cold seemed to seep into the bones, and the school's central heating hardly took the chill off the air. One afternoon, just a few days later, Cole decided not to go back after lunch at the chippy. He wanted to breathe in the ice-cold air, and if he was going to be cold, he'd rather be cold outside than in. If anything, his face looked worse. The bruise turned blue, then green, and the endless questions about it were beginning to annoy him. He wandered aimlessly up through the town, over the hills, past the local prison and the hospital. Someone waved from the prison window, and Cole waved back. He wondered what it would be like to be locked up, to have a door slammed shut and locked behind you, to know you weren't free to leave whenever you wanted. He'd hate it. Mungo, he'd been locked up. More than once, on remand. And he had hated it too. He prided himself on the fact that they had never been able to make any of the charges stick. "I'm too smart for them, son," he would tell Col. Col walked on. The town was well behind him now. He loved how it never took long to leave civilization behind him. 1 minute he would be right in the middle of the bustle, the noise, squabbling children, angry mothers, traffic, and the next he would be deep in the calm of the hills and the bracken and the loch. He loved coming here. He could think and be quiet and alone. It was hardly a loch, not exactly a Loch Lomond, more a very large pond with swans and ducks, but it was peaceful, especially now with a misty, icy fog descending on the January afternoon. Col squatted on the grass. He was already freezing. He was daft. Mungo, if he knew he'd come here, would think he was crazy. He could be sitting by the fire right now, pretending to his mother that his belly ached. He could be home getting spoiled. Hot broth, chips, his favourite comics. He'd go in a minute, he decided. And yet, it was so peaceful here on this icy, dark afternoon. There was a sudden squawk as a couple of ducks slid along the ice. Col laughed. They seemed to be arguing with each other. Man and wife, he imagined, blaming each other for something. He leaned forward to watch their progress, and for the first time he noticed another solitary figure at the edge of the loch. A boy, much younger than Col, 10 maybe, testing the ice with the heel of his shoe. He was wearing a maroon blazer, St. Roch's, posh, free-paying school nearby. Col watched him as he took one tentative step onto the loch. There were signs everywhere warning of thin ice. The boy took no notice, but then 10-year-old boys never do. He took a few steps further, more confident, as he realised that the ice was holding. Col could almost hear him think, "Thin ice, who are you trying to kid?" Col had done it many times himself. The boy was beginning to get cocky. He did a little dance on the ice, then, embarrassed, looked all around himself quickly to make sure that no one was there to see him. Col darted back behind the bushes, hung with frost, but only for a moment. The boy, now convinced he was alone, let out a yell of delight and went sliding almost to the middle of the loch. The 2 ducks squawked in annoyance and slid out of his way. The ice in the middle held him too. Col could see his confidence growing. To make sure, the boy jumped once, twice, 3 times. Col was beginning to think this wee boy was one sandwich short of a picnic. The ice in the middle of the loch probably wasn't as thick as this boy was. The boy looked all around him, thinking. Then he turned and began skating back to the edge. Col was almost relieved. This wee fool had taken enough chances. His eyes followed the boy back to the bank, watched with interest as he picked up his rucksack and took something out and stuffed it into his mouth. By the way he began to chew, it had to be a caramel. The boy dropped the rucksack and turned his gaze towards the loch, still deep in thought. There was a determination in his step as he headed back. What on earth was this idiot about to do? Col didn't have long to wait to find out. The boy lifted a boulder from the ground. It was almost as big as he was. Still chewing, he hoisted it up in his arms and struggled back onto the ice. "I don't believe this," Col muttered softly. The boy staggered into the middle of the ice again. It was growing darker by the minute, and the icy fog was descending fast. He lifted the boulder as high as he was able and suddenly he hurled it down onto the ice. Coll let out a low whistle. Crazy, he thought, but it seemed to be all the proof the boy needed. He began to jump wildly up and down on the ice, cheering, as if he and the ice were in competition against each other, and he had won. The boy was mad. Coll's eyes were drawn back to the rucksack, lying half open, so close by. He wondered if there were any more caramels in it. If there was, perhaps it would be something more than caramels. Money. St. Roch's fee-paying school, wee snotrad, would be bound to have money. Mummy and Daddy probably gave him lots of dosh. Coll urged towards the rucksack. He was hidden by the bracken and the bushes. No one else was here, no one but him and this daft boy. He had lifted the boulder again, not content, wanting to test it one more time. He never even glanced in Coll's way. Coll moved silently. The rucksack lay open. Coll could see books and jotters. He could even make out the tube of sweets. The sudden crash of the boulder against the ice made him jump. He shot a glance across the loch, but the boy was only interested in the ice and the boulder. He was whooping like a Comanche brave on the warpath. Coll reached the rucksack, crouched down lower and began to finger through the books and jotters. Here, a bookmark. There, a sticky, yucky caramel half chewed. Blah. But then, what was this? A crisp £10 note. Coll leaned forward, ready to slip it out. Wee fool deserved all he got. Right then there was a sudden ominous crack. A yell, a panicked scream. Coll looked up. The boy was dancing on the ice again. No, this time he wasn't dancing. He was trying to balance. The ice beneath him was cracking. The boy tried to jump clear, but he landed badly and broke more ice. Coll saw the panic on the boy's face as his arms flailed wildly and his feet jumped and slid about in a grotesque dance. Mesmerised, unable to move, Coll watched. The boy still hadn't seen him, couldn't see anything beyond his own peril. He wasn't even screaming or shouting. He was trying to jump clear, but with every movement, the ice moved, cracked, broke beneath him. It's your own fault, Coll wanted to yell. Stupid boy, brought it on himself, hadn't he? The ice on which the boy had been standing suddenly toppled almost upright, and the panic-stricken boy began to slip into the icy waters of the loch. Coll stood up, paralysed, unable to move. Nothing to do with him anyway, he kept telling himself. Couldn't the boy read? The notices everywhere? Beware, thin ice. It was his own fault. The boy was yelling at the top of his voice. Mom! Mom! Help me! Please, Mom! He was clawing at the ice, trying to pull himself up. His fingers clutched and scraped, but couldn't get a grip. Inside, Coll was screaming too. Your own fault. You deserve it. Who cares? I don't. The boy was sobbing now, and Coll tried to blot out his anguished cries. Please, please, someone help me. Not me, was all Coll could think. Definitely not me. In the same instant, he was running, pulling off his jacket, running towards the boy in the icy loch, and changing his life forever.